Hello everyone and welcome to our webinar about configuration drift and configuration drift, especially in environments that are managed by managed service providers. And we will give people a minute or two to join this session, but in the meantime you can share the city or country where you're from in the chat. I know that we have some attendees from all over the Europe and maybe some early birds from the US, but I guess mainly from Europe. But yeah, it will be interesting to hear where you're actually located. I'm currently in sunny and beautiful city of Espoo, near capital city of Finland, but I do actually live in central Finland, in a city called Jyväskylä. Oh, yeah, we have some Swedes here. Hey, and from Netherlands, Spain. Nice. And but yeah, let's give people just a minute to join. Okay, I guess we can start now. But yeah, thanks everyone for joining again. My name is Aapo Kettunen. I'm your host today. I work as head of product here at Plentics, and I have about 12 years of experience, mainly from Intune and SCCM management, and also sales engineering and application packaging and so on. And been working with MSPs my whole career, so we're quite familiar with the issues MSPs might have and what kind of problems they have in their customer base. And beside me is our Chief Growth Officer, Teemu Tiainen. I'm working behind the scenes and working as moderator in the chat and keeping the chat alive. And I'm joined by the one and only Microsoft MVP, Sami Laiho. Sami, do you want to say hello?
Hello.
Yes, hey. And yeah, this session will be about 1 hour long, and it will be recorded, and recording will be shared with attendees after this call. And so no worries if you miss some parts of it. And you can use the Q&A section for any questions you might have about this topic, and me and Sami will try to answer your questions during or at the end of this webinar. And the chat is open, so feel free to use it to chat with your colleagues in different countries. But yeah, today's topic is configuration drift, especially in MSP-managed Microsoft environments. Like why it happens, why it's difficult to control at scale, how MSPs can resolve any configuration drift in their environments, and how to resolve those. And Sami is here to explain the problem and about the configuration drift. And after Sami's session, we'll also briefly demonstrate the ways MSPs can use Plentics suite to identify and manage configuration drift across their customer tenants. But with that, Sami, over to you.
All right. Can you just verify that you can see my slides? There it should be.
Yes.
All right, great. So hello everyone and welcome. As said, my name is Sami Laiho. I'm a Microsoft MVP in the Windows operating system since 2011 and a security MVP since 2024. I've been in IT since the beginning of 1995. I have been an MSP officially, although nowadays mostly only for a single company outside of my own company. But anyway, that started back in 2000, and I am currently a Chief Research Officer. It's my official title. I mainly work as a security architect. I work in a small company called Adminize, and I am traveling around the world. Actually, last night came back from Norway, and Sunday should be Amsterdam. I counted that there's only 18 flights before my summer vacation in 4 weeks. So anyway, let's get on to the actual topic. So our topic for today is configuration drift in MSP environments. And if we first skip my presentation slides, the core problem itself, of course, is related to the problems that arise when standardization is not proper. For my whole life, I have been trying to find an easy partner as an MSP for a lot of my customers. And the biggest problem usually is that it's hard to buy. It's hard to buy because there are no concrete pricing, which would be like a computer for this amount of dollars or euros per month. There's always a lot of extras on top of it. I remember about 10 years ago, I started working actually with one MSP here in Europe, and they had insane amount of customers coming in all the time, and they were very successful. And the biggest success, asking anyone, was the steady pricing, including everything, and only basically based on the number of users at the customer. So how is it possible to even build something that would be very easy to both buy and sell? Then that all really boils down to standardization. Now, every MSP basically starts off usually as standardized somewhat, and then just during time it kind of like spreads apart. And instead of having a standard, you basically have individual different configured customers. So instead of people kind of owning this problem so that they would actually interfere when they see that the drift starts, this usually becomes just a permanent situation for the company. Now, if we think of it from my experience, first of all, of course, my job for ages has been teaching troubleshooting, and I have always gone into every environment blindfolded. Basically, I go to a customer that I know nothing about. Now, there's documentation, but the problem is that the documentation is only the kind of wish that they have of the configuration, having the reality that they are actually, every computer is slightly different, which makes it super difficult for me to start troubleshooting, as I don't really know what I'm troubleshooting until I go computer by computer by computer. As I said, I still today, although I've officially been an MSP for a long time, but I'm still today an MSP, but now only for my own family factory. So that's the only thing that I'm really an MSP for. But I can vouch for everything that I learned throughout the years, because think about the fact, although it's a very small environment and it's only 40, so that's 40, only 40 computers, 40 workstations, 7 servers, out of which 2 are actually Hyper-V hosts, so technically like 5 production servers. So it's super small. Yet I'm super proud of it, yet I use it as an example still today, as I have for my last 26 years. Why is it that? Because think about the fact that there is no service desk, there is no IT people except me. There's not a single person working for the factory that would have admin rights. Security-wise, I'm the biggest threat to the company in that sense that if I die, things are going to get chaotic. So I do understand that fact, because if I don't say it now, someone's going to point it out in the chat. But if you really think about it, making something like this work, me being the only person who can do anything or respond to any queries, yet I am able to travel more than 200 work days a year, which basically means I'm speaking at a conference or I'm at a customer, I can't answer any phone calls, yet our production runs 24/7 at peak times. with everything being computerized. So if you think about how that is possible, that's possible because of standardization. We don't have different kinds of machines. Well, we do, but the standardization level is very high. So everything is basically installed with a very standard base image. If you need the reality, of course, is they're going to plug in a device. They're going to plug in an, let's say, a QR code or barcode reader. They're going to plug in a device that cuts fabric at our factory. But when these are joined to the machines, all drivers are actually coming from a centralized location where they're all stored. So basically we roll out devices, we standardize the device, and then we standardize the procedure for taking care of drivers. And that's the biggest things to this. Of course, we have some physical failures, so we have to have spare equipment, but it's super easy to also replace because they're all standard. I take standardization to an extreme limit. So the production currently Windows 11 machines that we have on the production side, we do have 3 Windows XP machines and a Server 2003 as well, but that's a whole nother story. But mostly, of course, we are Windows 11, and those Windows 11 devices actually every morning they start off with the same bits because they're actually they're not re-imaged. They're using a system that I built for the city of Helsinki ages ago called Vioski, which just it basically resets the machine on every reboot. So I've always said that if someone tells me that if you use our standard installation, things should work, I've never really believed that. I've always said that if you put the same ones and zeros in the same order on that disk, then things will work in our environment. So I do take it to very extreme when it comes to standardization. But anyway, if you think about the CIS, Center for Internet Security, which is one of the most trusted entities when it comes to cybersecurity, CIS starts by saying that the 2 most important security controls for any environment are up-to-date hardware inventory and up-to-date software inventory. So security relies on the fact that you cannot secure unless you know what to secure. So in my other profession, that's kind of my most important thing. Now, troubleshooting wise, I would also say you can't fix unless you know what you're fixing. So it will really apply to both. But anyway, so this keeping that most critical control of any current IT environment, keeping that inventory up to date is your most important goal, which means that, of course, standardization is a key factor to that. Now, if you want to keep this, not the configuration, not first of all being drifting, then of course that's about your management system. That's the system that puts the image in place. That's that or does an autopilot or whatever. The management system that actually configures the system. Then the next step, of course, is at the endpoint itself. The endpoint, for it to not allow the drifting, there are certain controls that you need for that side as well. Those controls would basically be principle of least privilege and binary control. So no admin rights, app locker or app control for business or whatever it is, a third-party solution for binary control. Now, the drifting normally, as said, it's never there in the beginning. Normally everyone starts with a kind of a clear image and a clear idea of how our configuration will be. So usually everyone starts with a good position, and then it just starts to kind of go worse. The biggest reason for this, of course, is customer-specific tweaks. So you have different customers. We all know that usually there are no 2 customers exactly the same, which means that standardization, you should think of it exactly the same as in cybersecurity. We always say that don't let perfect be the enemy of good. So standardization is not a problem if it's not 100%. We have to keep it at the highest possible level we can, and we have to understand the difference. So we'll go back to that later on the slides. Rushed onboarding, take an environment and not take time for figuring out how we can mold them into a better to manage environment. So that's of course something that happens all the time. There's a huge rush in onboarding customers. Temporary policy bypasses. There is this one person who needs to bypass MFA, or there's even more, there are nowadays non-human accounts. So we have an account that needs to bypass MFA, and we just, to make it quickly work, let's just do a bypass, and then no one owns the bypass, which ends up in the bypass being a permanent solution. Legacy application requirements. OT environments, especially here in Finland, the biggest reason for any kind of exceptions that I see are usually OT environments. To be fair, many of the OT environments are not even online, meaning that they would not be using Intune, but those that are now starting to open up that airlock that they used to have now, or air cap, hopefully, usually just an airlock, but hopefully air cap. So those are probably one of the biggest problems. We have a lot of devices that are requiring certain different authentication methods or bypassing MFA, as we just discussed. So that's one of the very common ones as well. What does the drifting really mean? That means that we should have a standard for every customer, but they start to drift apart. So they start to have different settings. That's what the drifting itself really means. Security policies are getting inconsistent. So you have a very good baseline of what security should be, but now your environment start to drift apart from that. Security policies are a very common one because authentication is probably the single most drifting configuration that I see. Operational predictability disappears. The traditional, if something works here, it should work here, disappears as a benefit. So normally, if you know what you have and something works there, you could make assumptions. So you could make assumptions like, if we get it working in this environment or on this computers, it should do the same on this as well. Windows itself is a very illogical operating system. So I always start every troubleshooting training, even today that I start, I always start by saying that the only logic in Windows is that there is no logic. But that does not really, even though with Windows you can't do assumptions. So inside of the operating systems, I would always say, don't assume that if this works like this should work like this. Inside of the operating system, that's still today true. But if we look at two operating systems side by side having the exact same Windows configuration, then there is predictability. Which means that if we fix one environment, we will very probably be able to fix another environment as well. And as we have, as Intune, as we've seen with Striker and late events like that, Intune has a potential of course causing a lot of harm as well. It is a very powerful system. It has a huge amount of privileges on everything that your environment has. So now, if we think about Intune and the powers it has, can you actually use those powers or not? Well, it's supposed to be managing a lot of assets, but if you don't have standardized assets, then you are actually just managing groups of assets one by one. And that, of course, takes out the benefit from the provider's side. I mean, it's your business anyway. So I would assume that money would be some sort of a motivation, if not what I really like, which is happy end users. Automation, of course, becomes harder as well, because if you want to install applications, for example, for a huge amount of computers, if those computers are not configured the same, you are going to again have different results. Your mileage will vary when it comes to, even though you're a very talented packager or very talented in automating installations, then that really doesn't help if every target starts to drift apart. Service desk is one of the biggest sufferers from the configuration drift, because service desk job is, again, usually blindfolded. I mean, they speak to you on a phone, they see picture, maybe if they're lucky, they see pictures that you send through a ticketing system or something, but many times they are basically blind when it comes to your computer. And that means that if they don't know what to fix, they are not able to fix, just like I said from my personal perspective before. Where the drift happens, I could easily have just said Intune. I mean, almost everything in Intune can drift, so doesn't really matter. I mean, this is kind of a list out of my head that I came up with when I wanted to at least have some sort of a slide about what are different things that drift. Conditional access policies, we are, as a company, we also specialize in auditing conditional access policies and fixing conditional access policies. So that's of course something that comes out of my head instantly, because that's where I see the variance all the time. Conditional access usually relates to authentication as well, and as I said, authentication is one of the most common drifting components of Intune. Let's say Intune. Of course, everything that we're talking about would apply to Azure in general, but now that we're talking about configuration drift, let's kind of keep this focus currently on the Intune side, but this would of course apply to everywhere and not just Azure or Intune, also AD if you're doing on-prem stuff. So don't think this is something that only Intune would suffer from. But Intune baselines, endpoint security, admin rights, MFA enforcement, defender policies, backup retention settings, blah, 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 etc., 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 etc. So basically, we're talking about any kind of configuration targeting an asset from Intune. Why drift will be inevitable for everyone. So we can't really, as I said, you can't get to 100%. You don't have to. So this is exactly what I mean. It is inevitable. It'll always happen because we don't have two customers the same. So customers will always have demands that another customer does not. So there needs to be flexibility. It's more about the fact that we can't allow unlimited flexibility. So we have flexibility, but to a small extent, I would say. Now, customers will be yelling at you, saying that they need this configuration done right now. You say, that's not the way we do it. They say, we'll switch providers. That's most commonly what happens. We'll go to someone else. Let's see, someone will do it like we want to. Now, that's not a good way of keeping customers by saying that this all going in with this is the way, okay? What you should more be concentrating on is explaining what the benefits are, what the customer gets. So the customer service desk experience will be better. Customer cases, tickets will be solved faster. There is more predictability in the operating system performance. The budgeting becomes easier. The bonus sides of a standardized environment to a high level are like through the roof. It's more about if you can explain it to them. But the biggest mistake I see is this: I'm sorry, we have a standard. We serve so many customers. We have to adhere to a standard. We cannot we cannot drift apart from this. And I think that's the one that the customers hate, because the customers don't want that. They don't care that you don't like doing something, that you have rules. the most important part of this is the increasing their understanding about why they actually want to do this. This is exactly the same thing as I have for a few decades concentrated on getting rid of admin rights for end users. I do not go in by explaining what the negative things are that can happen if they use an admin account when it comes to security, like you'll get more malware, you might cause the company a ransomware event. No, go in with the positive sides. 65% reinstallations, 75% less tickets, better performance, SSDs live longer. So there's always a positive note. And if that's explained to the customer, then I believe that they are way more willing to actually accept your standardization. Of course, there are emergency troubleshooting changes. This is a very common one. Here I see the biggest problem being that like no one takes ownership of these changes. So there is we have to test one thing. Let's test if it's because of this. I can tell you not a week goes by without me going to a customer environment asking why is there an exception for this MFA rule? Oh, we forgot it there because we were testing a thing. You know it as well as I do. That happens every single week, at least once I have this conversation because we forgot it. Now there's only two ways to prevent this. Someone takes ownership of this change and stops forgetting, or you build automation remediations that you can do to make sure that that is not a permanent change. Staff turnover, tribal knowledge. Well, this all, of course, is inevitable inevitably will cause drift. So that's kind of just human, and we are still humans. Constant Microsoft platform changes. I wanted to have this here as the last because you can't always blame us. You can't always blame the Intune admins because Microsoft changes things. So we've lately seen this quite a lot where Microsoft suddenly changes a setting. They fix things without even telling us. You have to make a kind of an emergency change in the way you operate because Intune features are down. So I'm not trying to put this blame on the Intune admin because sometimes it's actually the platform. And this is the difference between our old, more traditional on-prem, like AD world, and then the more modern Entra ID Intune world, the cloud world. That's a big difference because we are nowadays working, in a way, we are working like if we would have worked on-prem, but the Active Directory service would be owned by a single company and provided to every customer in the world. Although we have tenants, we have separation there, yes. But everyone connects to the same service, which means that if we have an issue, it is always affecting thousands of different customers. So it is very different. It's a centralized service for everyone in the world, although delivered from different data centers. This was the first I've ever heard about, but like, is it big next week for some North American customers, Microsoft actually send out a note that they're going to have a maintenance break. I mean, that whole data center is down. I've never heard that Intune officially states that we're going to have a break. Just have a maintenance break. Sorry, out for like the 2 to 3 hours or whatever it is that they promised. This probably has to do with actually physically changing stuff from a data center to another or something, but it was kind of interesting because I've never ever heard about it before, that they would announce publicly that we'll just gonna go down for this time. And that kind of comes back to the same thing. We're not 100,000 active directories around the world. We're just one gigantic Intune. So we can't always help. Microsoft doesn't make it easier. The hidden operational costs are, of course, if we think about money-wise this thing, then there's a huge amount of benefits for you as a company to adhere to standardization. So it's not just I say so, you should see the benefit on the financial side as well. Now, responding to ticket time, of course, it makes perfect sense. If the service desk knows what the target is like, they can start fixing without the first part of every, like when I teach troubleshooting, the second topic I have is inventory and monitoring. So where do we get information on what kind of a target do we have? So it would save me a lot of time. This is common sense. It would save me a lot of time if I know what kind of a target I have. So that would make no sense that a standardized environment would somehow be as slow to fix as a non-standardized one. I actually have a situation currently with a certain Dell patch that was just delivered. My family factory uses Dell machines. I know, but still we do. And we have an issue where a certain Dell driver version with the latest patch Tuesday, after a few days, it actually makes it impossible to log into a machine. And I have laptops which are standardized. So that appeared first on 2 devices. I fixed it on that day for those 2 devices. And now actually this morning I got a message or a ticket saying that there's another machine with this symptom. Super easy to fix. I already instantly know what the fix is. What I did not know is that I believed that that would have shown up already like a few weeks ago or a week ago at least, but it actually showed up today, which was explained by a vacation time for a certain user. But anyway, so a lot faster to fix because I know exactly what I'm fixing. Documentation becomes unreliable. As said, I suffer from this personally as a consultant constantly. Go into a situation, try to fix a system. Here's your documentation, but the documentation is nowhere near what I see on the screen. And I'm not talking about like Entra ID will every day it will look different on your screen. I'm talking about systems that are managed. So the documentation is impossible to keep in place. I don't know, maybe there's some of you that are so different. That's a nice way to put it. You're so different that you actually like documentation. I have met in Finland, I've been teaching about 18,000 different IT professionals during my career, and I have met 2. So there are people who actually like documentation, but most people don't. Now, the more you let the standard drift apart, the more you will be documenting. So there should also be, of course, a motivation for keeping the drift out. Onboarding engineers becomes harder. If you have a standardized management system, you can build one instruction set which is used when onboarding new tech people. If I would come to join your company and I would ask, how's your normal Windows configuration for your environment? And your answer would be every consultant's favorite answer, it depends, then that'll slow things down considerably. Escalations increase because there's that one person who knows. This is so common in our business. I don't know, I need to escalate this. And then we call that Mr. or Mrs. or Miss Intune, the one who knows. Because not everything is same and only one person knows because no one has documented or remediated that change that was made. Engineers lose confidence. Yes, automation starts breaking. We've talked about all of this already. But in general, of course, the big part here is that it destroys scalability. So you can't scale to as many customers. If your intent is to be something than a small shop that serves a few customers, if you want to scale, then the only route for scalability really is the standardization. Security-wise, of course, the impact is huge. Very inconsistent security posture, meaning that you don't really have the knowledge of if everything is secure. There are weaker tenants and stronger protected tenants. Now, the problem, of course, is that from the attacker's perspective, 99% of attacks today are opportunistic, which means that they will only need one. Legacy authentication survives. Microsoft is doing whatever they can to kill out all old authentication types. They've done that a lot. There are big pushes again next summer, killing RC4, although it relates to Kerberos, but still, I mean, Microsoft is constantly working on trying to kill out the old authentication methods. And now that, of course, is a very difficult job in many environments because of the, as we said, the old systems that we use. But from the configuration point of view, again, one easy target, 1 week target for the enemy is enough. They get average payment last year for ransomware events was $2.7 million globally. So 2.7 million for an average payment. You really most of them only need to find 1 out of 1,000 and they'd be filthy rich anyway. Excessive admin rights accumulate. Of course, I know I'm talking about my own perspective here a lot. So that's one of the most common things that I see as a configuration drift. This means these people get local admin, others don't. He's a dev, he gets local admin. And the saddest one, of course, sometimes he's the owner of the company, he gets admin. So that's very concrete for me. I see this all the time. And then I start with the customer, we remove all local admin rights. They call me back 3-4 years later, and now it's around 30 to 40% of end users having admin rights again. So it again drifted away from the standard. So that will, of course, make you, if you have local admin rights, you have as many IT departments as you have local admins. So that will, of course, increase the potential of you being a ransomware event victim tenfold. Not just being a victim on a single machine, but the blast radius increases because ransomware can wipe out more entities if it has too much privileges. Compliance becomes extremely difficult, or at least extremely difficult to report on. So when we combine all of this, we can say that standardization enables scalability, predictability improves support quality, security controls become enforceable, automation becomes realistic, customer onboarding accelerates. These should all be positive. So what I'm trying to say here, and I tried this, I know it's not easy sometimes, especially when talking to an end customer, but I have tried to standardize everything for my whole career. I was 15 years old when I started as domain admin for, from our perspective, a very big soda company, PepsiCo, back in 1995. And it was very highly standardized, which kind of means I learned to live in an environment that was heavily standardized. So in a way, it's like always been there because I learned the benefits when I was really young. But it's still although I would buy this completely, that's not the problem. The problem is convincing the others to understand that they want this. You probably will understand because I would say you're all the providers that will provide this as a service, but the end user is the one that you need to convince that that's what they want. So then all of these points are more for this, you convincing them that this is what they want. Standardization at its core, I think the most important thing is to understand that it's an enabler, it's not a disabler. So most people think that standardization removes agility. They think we can't do our job we can't be as productive as we could be because it's lowering our productivity as there's no flexibility. So most people will start off talking to you thinking it's a disabler, but it is an enabler. So you just have to convince them to understand what the enablement means in this case. Now, remember I said in the beginning and a few times already that you don't have to get to 100%. So we don't have a standard for standardization. Your standardizations will be different for you as a provider. Variance is not prohibited. We can always have exceptions, and we can have people we can have the drift that we're talking about. The only difference there is that it needs to be owned and documented and remediated as well. So it cannot be a permanent status. One thing that will, of course, as a provider, make your life a lot easier if you standardize, and that is regulatory compliance. NIS2, ISO 27001, different countries, different regulations, or different areas, different regulations. Whatever your regulation is that you're trying to adhere to, of course, you document once. The documentation states and shows that you are compliant. Now you can use the same documentation for your next customer and the next and the next and the next. If you've ever had to respond to these regulatory requirements, you know that it's not a really fast and easy thing to get like ISO 27001 certification. So that'll help you a lot. So if you have to convince to get more time to standardize, this might be a tool for you. Biggest security threats of configuration drift. We already spoke about some of these. I'm bad at following my slides. I want to say when things can pop to my head, but it's good that they're somewhere so I also remember everything. So we spoke about excessive privilege accumulation. We spoke about inconsistent security posture. Detection and monitoring becomes weaker. You know, your job nowadays is not to stop the enemy. That's what I tell everyone. Proactive security's job is not to stop the enemy. You have to assume breach. That is one thing from Zero Trust. One of the 3 core pillars of Zero Trust, assume breach, and you really have to buy into that. You can't anymore be in this business if you think you can stop the enemy. Your job is not to stop the enemy. Your job is to slow it down. You slow it down with your security controls so that they have to swim sideways, which comes to the most important thing. So your job is to make your enemy an anomaly. You make them blink out from all the other noise. You make them visible for the SOC. So if there's a standard, then from a SOC perspective, there is a baseline, which means that we can identify things that are out of the baseline. They're the anomaly. So standardization from a SOC perspective makes their life 100 times easier, plus makes you a lot more secure because we can identify the threats because there's no noise. Well, there is always noise, but we can add it into the baseline. If anyone's worked for a SOC, you should know this very well. There's thousands of lines of events going on your screen, and for you to identify something, the more you can make it look like an anomaly, the easier it is to spot, which means SOC's job is actually to stop the enemy. It's like standard security and video surveillance compared to locks on doors. Locks on doors are just to slow people down. There's the reactive security that actually its job is to stop the enemy. So in total, it's making the SOC's life a lot easier. Same, of course, goes for the next phase. So if something got in and caused something in your environment, then it is the time for incident response. I worked 6 months helping out the security company to establish operations in Finland, and I worked with IR, so incident response a lot. So if the environment is not properly documented, the first day goes by just trying to figure out what the customer has. That's, of course, the answer to that is up-to-date inventory, but you're part of that, making sure that that inventory is up-to-date and keeps up-to-date. So again, standardization there as well helps if we get to the kind of worst case scenario. Biggest security threats of configuration drift still continuing. It creates invisible risk as we don't know what we have. Invisible risk is a thing that you can go with, again, a argument that you can go into another department, meaning the risk management department. Most dangerous drift is, as we said, you don't have to get rid of all the drift, but the most dangerous drift is the undocumented one, unreviewed one, something that has become normal. So risky configurations don't really look that risky anymore. They've been there forever. Exceptions become, it's just the way this customer works. These are your biggest enemies, because then at some point, no one even understands that we're insecure. Sometimes money speaks. So of course, from your side, biggest threats for the MSP business, operational complexity explodes, support costs quietly increase, key person dependency becomes dangerous, only one person knows how this certain customer works, becomes harder to go on a vacation because becomes more demanding on the employees, burnouts, so on. Automation standard tooling stop working, customer experience becomes inconsistent, compliance and cyber insurance become harder. Cyber insurance wise, 90% of my US customers have a cyber insurance, 90% of my European customers don't have a cyber insurance. So that's but I'm trying to cater to all continents here. So what can you actually do now? Is there anything we can do about this? Maybe after my talk here, you can see the kind of technical solutions that can be helping you out, but I'm not really going into tech. I'm trying to stay on the concept level here. So baselining, of course. So you set your own baseline, then you document all exceptions. Even that is very inconsistent in this business. I very rarely see that someone has actually properly documented the exceptions. You review exceptions regularly, and you assign an owner for an exception. Someone who owns this exception. That's one of the key things that I always want to do. I want to know who did this, so that someone becomes responsible also for making sure that that exception will not be there forever. Reduce human variance with templates. So templating everything, of course, we've worked with user templates, computer templates forever with accounts, but this of course applies to configuration as well. And if you can, then try to automate that drift detection so that you would actually have visibility of what kind of a drift we're talking about. Treat exceptions as technical debt. So like there is a feature that there are features that we haven't had the time to implement. That's technical debt, but we have things that we haven't had time to fix is technical debt as well. So basically, configuration drift should be technical debt. There are things that we haven't done. We haven't gotten rid of the drift, or we haven't gotten rid of the drifting component, let's say. Now, key takeaways, after I tried to describe to you what configuration drift means and why it's bad for both business and security, bad for both you and your customers, even more focusing on why it's an enabler and good for you and your customer, trying to tell you how you can convince them. Some key takeaways. Remember, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. The undocumented, unmanaged drift is something that you should get rid of. Operational maturity requires governance. Governance is not technical. Security people are many times not that big fans of compliance and governance. They're more into these very technical controls, but there is no way to prove that there is technical security if we don't have governance, making sure that it also stays there. Scalable MSPs prioritize disciplined standards. That's provable from the business. We have successful companies in the business that have scaled up very, very rapidly and still being successful in this. So if that's your goal, then the only option really is to standardize. You can be a few customer shop without standards, but if you want to scale, there really is no other way. All right, I hope that gave you some idea of what drifting means and what we could do, why it's good for you and not a disabler. But that's really my part of this, and I am now going to give this back to Plentics, and then I can go and check out the Q&A.
Yes, thank you, Sami. It was really interesting and helpful information. Yeah, it's not a simple thing to prevent and resolve, but yeah, before we wrap up, I wanted to briefly show you how we at Plentics aim to resolve any challenges MSPs might have with the configuration drift and also configuration management at scale. The Plentics suite, it's built for MSPs with the help of MSPs, and it's aimed to help MSPs maintain visibility and consistency and operational control across their customer tenants. And yeah, it offers a multi-tenant single pane of glass tool. So you only need to access our Plentics suite portal to manage all your customer tenants, because jumping from tenant to another tenant, it's also a time-consuming task, and like we all know, there is a lot of different portals in M365, so this should help that a bit. And with Plentics suite, we have a few different capabilities. So we have tenant management, which we will focus on today, but we also have endpoint management. So that's for endpoint management, but also for third-party patch management. And we also have a custom application packaging available as well. We also have endpoint and tenant analytics, and with the help of analytics data, you can also get the dynamic alerts and reports. But like I mentioned, we will be focusing on tenant management today, and we will be publishing a new feature for tenant management in June, especially for configuration drift, which will allow you to identify configuration drift and also remediate any drift that has been found. But before showing the upcoming configuration drift feature, I just wanted to highlight how you can currently compare your configurations and also create new configurations with Plentics suite. So with the Plentics suite, the tenant management is based on like MSP-managed baseline tenant, and that baseline tenant can also be based on another baseline like sys baseline or anything else that's appropriate from the MSP and also for their customers. And with the compare configuration, you can make sure that all the configurations are or all configurations match with your baseline. So you can use this to evaluate new customer environments, but you can also use it to make sure that the existing customers have the proper configurations and nothing has changed from your original baseline. So here we can see like a comparison between our template and another tenant. So everything that's marked as okay, it's okay. Everything is the same in baseline and in our customer tenant. But there are some items that have a warning. So that basically means that the configuration policy or configuration exists in both tenants, but there is a different values in some of the configurations. And of course, we can see that some items are completely missing. And we can also see a detailed explanation like what is the missing or different property between these tenants. And with the help of this information, we can use create configurations. So with create configurations, you can deploy configuration policies, compliance policies, groups, any other supported configuration types from your baseline tenant to multiple different tenants at the same time. And you can also create assignments simultaneously. So you can deploy to your native all devices or all users groups, but you can also use Entra ID groups that will be created automatically if they don't already exist in your target tenant. And like you can see in the video, I selected a few different configurations from our baseline tenant, and it was a really simple and actually quite fast process to deploy all the configurations from our baseline to our target tenants. So that's what's already in Plentics suite, but here's a sneak peek of the upcoming configuration drift feature. And yeah, the following slides are from a version that's still being tested, so visuals might change slightly, but the basic idea will be the same. So basically, configuration drift feature will show you a detailed timeline of all the changes that have happened in your customer tenants. It's not only just the changes to current configurations, but you will also see like new policies and deleted policies. And you can select if you want to just keep track of like specific type of configurations like conditional access policies or configuration policies, because those are quite important to have in Intune. And with configuration drift, you can also subscribe to email alerts. And from the configuration drift page, you can also see details of what values have changed, like what is the original value and what is the new value for each different property. And because we also want to fix any configuration drift, you also have a possibility to remediate any configuration drift by allowing you to select if you want to completely revert back to the previous version, or if you want to like be fine with the new configurations. But you can also mix and match. So in this example, you can select a couple configurations from the previous original baseline version, but one value will be using the new changed property. This is a feature that's coming up in June. It will be part of our tenant management capability. And behind the scenes of this configuration drift, there is a scheduled backup, so that's a bonus for customers using this feature. So you can also recover by using those scheduled backups. But that's it from me. And thank you everyone for joining today.